Installing your car audio system like this is exactly how you do more work to get a trash outcome. So here's 5 simple things you can do to take your car audio installations from this to this. My love for working on cars started with car audio, so it really does make me sad when I see stuff like this. We're working with a 2002 911 for this video, so much of the action is going to be up front rather than in the rear. But regardless, these are time-tested methods anybody can follow. Ooh, yeah, that looks great. Number 1 is the most frustrating of all of this, and that's cutting the factory wiring harness to install the radio. 99 times out of 100, do not cut the factory wiring harness, especially if you're only upgrading a head unit. This is the radio that I pulled out of the car. This plug plugs directly into the radio, and you can see outside of some dodgy workmanship, this has all been cut apart. These 3 connectors here are our factory radio connectors. If we still had the stock one, these 3 would plug right into the back. I have made some repairs already because when they did this, they cut this so close to the connector that it made it a little bit more of a pain in the butt to fix. This is the radio that we're going to install in the car. It's a radio built specifically for the 911. You'll notice that it has its own plug with the 3 connectors on it on the back, which is really awesome. So all we would have to do is plug each one of these in, and in theory, our radio should work. See how easy that was? But what happens if you get a radio that doesn't have this really cool harness already connected to it or part of the kit? That is a great question. And this is the answer: a wiring harness adapter. This will allow you to plug into the car and plug into the radio without having to be Hackzilla and hack the factory harness apart. Girls will like you if you do this. Babes dig wiring harness adapters. I don't think they care. So what if you can't find one of these? I found a really cool option, and that's these wiring extenders. So the brown connectors are all our speaker wires. This is our power, our ground. You're doing all of your cutting and splicing on these pigtails rather than cutting the factory harness. I've seen a lot of hack workmanship when $10 total not only would have made their life easier on the install, but my life easier having to undo their workmanship. As a warning, I will be cutting the factory harness in this very, very, very rare instance. We have a car that's missing factory components, a wiring harness that's already been hacked apart, and to me, there's probably not a better way to do it in this very rare case. Also, when you're cutting and splicing your adapter harness, please don't use household wire nuts. This is wrong, although it's holding on there pretty well. What I'm thinking for right now is amplifier either like this or like this, which I think looks a little cleaner. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to drill holes and end up drilling holes in the gas tank, which is right here. Just notice this. This is a bigger wire than this wire here. Look at that. When I talk about getting the right equipment, I also mean doing good splices and wire connections. This is not good. This is actually the place where they did a pretty good job on this install. If you have to pass through a hole, make sure you use a grommet. Otherwise, you run the risk of chafing on a sharp edge and causing a short of your wire. Here's a little tip. Soak that wire with some soapy water, and then it pulls right through. Number 2 is dangerous wire routing. This is the most egregious one that I see, and that's your amp power cable ran through the door jamb. Every time you close your door and open your door and close your door and open your door, it pinches that cable just a little bit. Eventually, wearing the wire sheathing all the way through, and now you've created a thermal event hazard that there's no need for. I've seen battery cables routed near axles to exhausts. Ooh, yeah. Whoever did this install, it looks great. Running an amplifier's power cable is usually one of the hardest parts of installing an amplifier. Doing it this way is easy. I totally get it, but it's also really dangerous and a terrible place to have a power cable ran. Here's a little bonus tip that I didn't include. Disconnect your battery, negative first, always. That way you don't have to worry about unintended thermal events. Boomer lost his wings. Sorry, Boomer. So you might be wondering, Charles, if I can't run my harness through the door jamb, where can I run it? Well, these speaker wires have gone through this grommet, and that's really what you want to do. A lot of times you can find existing grommets in the firewall. You got to drill a hole, but this one is friendly enough to have its own grommet. I'm also going to take this battery tray out. Looks like probably had a battery leak, which is why this is all rusted. Up next, our third tip. Don't suck at grounding. See this here? This is a ground wire. Notice, properly crimped, nice heat shrink, and the diameter of the eyelet perfectly fits this stud that I have where I'm gonna ground it out. I did this. That's why it looks so amazing. Let me show you what this looked like before I made this repair. Now, I don't care that this wire is red because the color of the sheathing is irrelevant, but in no world is that an actual good quality ground. Bad grounds can cause excessive heat, distorted sound, poor amp performance. They can cause arcing, which can lead to you-know-where, burning all the 996s. When you're trying to decide where to put the ground, one, try to make the ground as short as possible. Look at how short the car's ground cable is. It's, I don't know, 6 or 7 inches. You want to follow that same thing with your amplifier. You also want to make sure that you're not trying to ground to a surface that's painted. You'll notice on these factory grounds, when you take the nut off, there's no paint behind it so that you can have a good chassis ground on your car. If you're not sure you have a good grounding spot, here's how to check it with a multimeter. We have our meter set to ohms. We'll take one lead to a known good ground. In this case, I'm just going to use the battery ground because it's real close. And then our other lead can go to where we're trying to ground it. Look what happens when I put it on an existing vehicle ground right here. 0.2 ohms, perfect. So this is going to be a good grounding spot. Also remember, resistance is a static test, not a dynamic one. So this is not the only way or really the best way to see if you got a good ground. This is just a really quick way to make sure you don't have a horrible one. This is the amplifier we're going to be using, and like I said before, I'm trying to test out where it's going to go. There's this spot right here that is almost perfect. I'm worried if we put it here, it's gonna overheat. I'm still working through where I'm actually gonna put the amplifier, so you'll have to stick around to the end of the video to see, or you paid attention to the very first few seconds of the video, and I have already figured it out in the past, which is the future from now, but the past for you. Hot tub time machine. Next up is probably the hardest of all of the things, and that's getting the right equipment. There's so many options out there that it's actually kind of overwhelming. In fact, we made a mid-video pivot away from that big 5-channel amplifier that I was initially going to install in favor of 2 small amplifiers. This one to drive the main speakers in the car, and then this one to drive the subwoofer only. And what's awesome is it's gonna fit real pretty in the spot where the factory CD changer went under the hood. Also, I was gonna use a piece of plastic to mount the amps. You'll see in a little bit that I changed my mind and found a much cleaner install. For this build, I got some awesome advice from my buddy Christian at Enfig Car Stereo. He helped me put together a really great upgrade that didn't break the bank. Because in this world, it's pretty easy to spend all the money. What's happening? Did you get those wiring reports done? See, we're putting cover sheets on all the wiring reports now. I'll make sure that you get another copy of that memo. Coming in on Saturday, Bill. That would be great. Not only do you have to make sure you get the right hard parts, don't shortcut on your wiring either. We talked a bunch about the harnesses you can buy that make the car plug and play. Don't forget about power and ground wires. I'm gonna link up a chart that will tell you what size power and ground wire you need for the size amplifier that you're planning on running. We need to get our speaker signals from our radio to our 4-channel amplifier, and there's 2 major ways that can happen. My favorite way is RCA cables. To me, this is the best way to do it. It's the cleanest signal. Now for our case, we have some factory wiring harness hackery that's already happened. So I'm gonna do it the second way, and that's use the speaker level inputs to go into the amplifier. These wires right here are the signal wires from the radio to what would be the factory amplifier. I'm going to cut these, I'm going to splice them into a connector, then I'm gonna plug that directly into the amplifier. Now, as much as I don't really wanna cut this factory harness, it's actually gonna allow me to make something that looks really nice instead of that. So now we have our signal out of the radio into our amplifier. There's 4 channels coming in. Left front, left rear, right rear. There's 5 going out. So we're gonna have to get a little creative on how I do that. I wanna follow my own advice and just do a quick test of the amplifier, and I have my right front channel wired in. And we're gonna see if we got tune skis. I just have the radio sort of generically plugged in. We have no front. The reason I say test before you fully install or as you go is mostly to make sure like you didn't get a wire crossed. What it doesn't account for is someone like me being completely stupid and spending a bunch of time trying to figure out why I have no right front channel. If you'll notice on the passenger door and the dash, you see the problem. Here's the dash speaker. Why don't we plug it in and see if our channel works? Oh my God. Yeah, here's the door speaker chilling right here. Oh my gosh. But for real, this is why you want to test your stuff as you go along. Much more better. I wish I had some sort of like Uncle Ben from Spider-Man like advice. A little light on the bass, but we have a bunch of 4-inch speakers. So I think next up we get the subwoofer amp wired up. Basically gonna do the same thing. You might be tired of staring at this jumble of wiring, so let's take a little detour and talk about our speaker setup. When it comes to upgrading your speakers, there's 4 major things that I look at. First off is size. This is a 6.5-inch speaker. This one is a 4-inch speaker. You can definitely see how significantly different in size they are. If the speaker hole you have is for a 4-inch speaker, cramming a 6-inch one in there is gonna be pretty difficult. Next one is speaker depth. Just by looking at it, you can see the depth of this speaker is pretty significant compared to the ones that we're putting in the 911. So you wanna make sure that your upgraded speaker and your factory speaker are pretty similar in depth. Next is gonna be speaker style. This speaker actually has a tweeter that goes with it, so it's more like a speaker pair. The speaker we're installing is a woofer cone with a tweeter built into it, so we're actually gonna remove the factory tweeters from the dash location as well as the back location. The 4th thing you need to pay attention to is going to be the resistance of the speaker. Now this can get really complicated if you're keeping a factory amplifier or a factory radio and only upgrading the speakers. Do your best to get the same resistance value speakers as factory. If the car came with 4-ohm speakers, try to put that back in there and wire it up the same way. This car, all over the place. We have 1-ohm speakers, 2-ohm speakers, 4-ohm speakers. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. We're just gonna swap the speaker. And if possible, don't try and take this stuff apart when it's ice cold. Cold plastic can get really brittle and break super easy. Now, I'm gonna run our RCAs through this grommet here. And what I did was, when I was pulling everything out, I left a wire so that I could just use it to fish through. It reminded me of something that happened not long after I left the dealership. I get a call from the general manager of Volkswagen. He's like, hey, what do you know about Audi Q7s? I was like, I don't know, whatever. Like, what do you want to know? And apparently this dude had like $3,000 worth of ham radio stuff installed. The car shut off at a stoplight or something, and it cooked his ham radio. So I was able to turn the start stop off, not really, but you know, cheat the system so it never shut off again. But man, he was mad. Here's a tip that even today, I still struggle with, and that's make sure you test everything before you put the car back together. Look, you just worked really hard and installed a bunch of cool stuff. Of course you want to get it done and play around with it. But the problem you might run into not testing everything is to get the whole job done and something not work properly. So before you do your final amp mount, before you run your wires the complete way, tuck everything, put carpets in, whatever, make sure everything works. Run through your whole system and be sure you don't have any bugs or issues. It's a whole bunch easier and way less frustrating to fix it before the final install than to get it all done and realize you have a problem. In my test before installing everything step for the subwoofer, I got the sub amp all hooked up and connected to power these two speakers right here. But it actually felt really, really weak. So I want to take this out, take the top piece off. This is definitely, this is definitely consistent with what else we've had going on in this car. In this case, I'm just gonna clean up the wiring and put it all back together. Everything works, so I think our tuning is going to come from the amplifier and the radio once we have it all back together. Actually, I have a question for you guys. Does anyone make an enclosure for the 996 that might house a bigger subwoofer, maybe like 1.8? 110 but still kind of fits in that factory location? We got two 5 1/4s, which are kind of on the small side by today's standards, and I think it'd be cool to drop a 8 or a 10 in, because these are tiny. At this point, I've tested all of the things that we're gonna add into the car, and everything works. Now, in your testing, if you find that maybe the sound isn't quite what you were hoping for, keep in mind, we still have a ton of tunability with both amplifiers as well as the head unit. For my radio setup, the head unit is probably the least important part of all of it. All I really need from that is CarPlay and a way to get the signal out of my phone to the amplifier. And if you're worried about quality issues with this kind of stuff, I've actually ran a bunch of different ones in a bunch of different cars, and I've had a pretty good experience with all of them. Our amplifiers, along with the speakers, are what's doing the actual work to give us good audio quality. Our final interior piece, we're gonna mount the bass knob this way, and I think I'm gonna tuck it way up here because this is not a knob I'm planning on knobbing all that much on. With that long journey and several pivots, let's just take a minute to appreciate how good that amp install looks, how good it looks on the interior, and the thing that's warming my heart is knowing that behind all of this, we don't have a bath of hack wiring going on. We have our 2 amps mounted in a similar to factory location, which not only looks good, it's gonna give it plenty of airflow and accessibility when we go to tune our amp. The radio in the car, for the most part, looks like it could have came that way. I wish that the radio sat a little bit more flush to the bezel, but it is what it is, and overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I also installed a new screen for the HVAC controls because they were all wonky, and I did something that is classic me. I retrofitted the comfort turn signals from a Mark IV or B5 into this car. I love it so much. That brings me to my final tip. Just because it's loud doesn't mean it's good. Your music taste is already questionable as it is. You don't want to just crank the gains and all the settings up on your radio and your amp because it's going to sound terrible. Take some time and tune your amplifier and your radio. There's some awesome videos on YouTube that will walk you step by step. We have an amplifier that's supposed to do it all by itself, so let's set it up and see what happens. You run some pink noise, which just sounds like static to me, and it's supposed to auto-tune the whole setup. How exactly it does that, I'll be very honest, I have no idea. Jeez! So for us, this was not only a refresh and a modernization, but now I have a nice radio that I can CarPlay, amps that are fully controllable, and we got a whole bunch of cool stuff that we can do now and make this thing a little bit more fun to drive, which, to be honest, it's already really awesome. So, and now we've proper Mark V'd it because we put a nice radio and everything in it, and just have done no maintenance yet. Which brings me to a question. What's the first song that you listen to anytime you do any car audio work? Ooh, yeah. This is gonna sound great. Also, if you could go ahead and subscribe, that would also really be great. Wrong gear.